No matter what time of day it is, you can never go wrong with a solid platformer. They are easy to get into, and their simple gameplay structure can be experienced in many ways depending on the player. But what separates a good platformer from the great ones is where the developers take this existing genre and puts their own spin on it to not only make it stand out, but also encourage players to come back and replay these games while mastering the skill set they are presented with. Sometimes it can even lead to pulling off some impressive feats the developers didn't intend to be there in the first place. The peeps over at Evening Star, a studio that is founded by the same developers who gave us Sonic Mania, threw their hat into the platforming ring and surprised us with Penny's Big Breakaway, a game that not only contains elements from Sonic the Hedgehog with its momentum-based platforming, but it also takes inspiration from the 3D Mario games, which you'll see for yourselves when I talk more about the game. Throughout the story, you're playing as a girl named Penny who is trying to audition for a talent show for the upcoming gala and stumbles upon a magical string along the way. This string enhances her yo-yo to the point where it brought it to life and gave it dog-like tendencies, letting Penny perform tricks she likely wasn't able to perform before, and with this newfound partner by her side, she was surely going to be able to knock out the competition no problems at all. She was almost successful too, but her yo-yo got just a bit too excited from all the praise and embarrassed Emperor Eddie, which got Penny labeled as a wanted criminal. Now she needs to evade Eddie's army of penguins and find some way to fix this entire mess, otherwise this will become her final act. Before you can play any of these stages, you are brought to the stage select screen where you are able to select any of the previous levels you've cleared or pick up right where you left off. You even have the option to visit the Star Globes, which are more challenging stages that you can unlock with one of the game's collectibles, more on that later, and you also have the bonus shop where the player can spend currency earned throughout the game to give Penny a boost to make her journey a tad bit easier. Also, if you chill on the menu screen for a minute, you'll notice that the menu's interface will bounce to the music's tempo. I know it's a small detail, but it just adds to the game's charm. Penny's Big Breakaway mainly consists of levels where your main goal is to get from start to finish while steering clear of the penguins who will chase you down to the ends of the planet, all while avoiding other hazards that can arise. If you happen to fall off a cliff or get caught by the penguins, you will respawn at the last checkpoint you've cleared, but you'll lose one of your life counters in the process, or as the game calls it, Gutso points. Losing all 4 of them, however, will cause your score to drop immensely, and then you'll be presented with the option to pick up right where you left off with those points gone forever. If you are someone who really cares about maintaining a high score, starting over is going to feel more enticing to do. Otherwise, if you just want to casually enjoy the game, then by all means don't worry about it, especially since this game does not use an extra life system. Penny thankfully has a lot of movement options that are very fun to use, taking the easy to learn but difficult to master approach, which is very rewarding if you put in the time to learn all the ins and outs of her tricks. She can air dash, double jump, wall jump, spin in place, suspend her yo-yo in midair to sling herself further or higher depending on when she releases it, and performing that same suspension trick on a ledge or a wall will hook herself on there, a trick that really comes in clutch at times when I misjudge my spacing. And if Penny really needs to move, she can ride on her yo-yo, which can be charged like a spin dash. This is very useful for getting across certain hazards, outrunning the enemy, or just staying on the move in general, but only if you can keep that momentum going, as she will gradually lose speed over time. Perhaps a little too quickly if you ask me. You can keep up her momentum by riding along slopes, and performing air dashes can help in that department too. I should also point out that the momentum in this game feels great overall. Anytime you're traveling along any of the slopes, whether it's uphill or down, you're going to be able to feel the weight of that character all throughout her movement, and it feels like you're actually driving a small motorized vehicle, which makes sense considering the action that is taking place. Slinging Penny's yo-yo, or performing that spin I mentioned earlier, is also her means of defending herself against the enemies and penguins alike. If a penguin latches onto you, you can knock them off by performing any of her yo-yo actions, but you don't want to sit still for too long, as these guys are relentless and will swarm you before you even have a chance to blink. I mean, they will continue to swarm you right after you completed a stage and you're in the middle of doing your tricks. They don't care. If Penny gets enough of these birds on her shoulder, it's curtains for her. The opening stage does a good job at showing you the ropes, enough to at least get you swinging. but not too much, as this game encourages a player to learn all kinds of applications of Penny's moveset on their own. I'll admit that I did struggle a bit in the beginning when I was trying to apply all of Penny's trick combos I can do, but by the time I reached the midpoint of the game, I was already soaring through the skies and skipping parts of the stages like it was nothing. Penny's move pool offers plenty of freedom and player expression, and I know for a fact that the stuff I'm showing off on screen is still basic compared to what you can actually do. As you are completing these stages, there are 3 bolts you are able to collect, usually tucked away in hidden spots all over the levels, and 3 civilians that you can help out. These bolts are needed in order to unlock more Star Globe stages, as I pointed out earlier. Meanwhile, helping out the civilians will add to your overall score at the end of the stage, as more will show up to watch you perform. These civilian missions can range from delivering a fragile item that can break upon contact with something hazardous, collecting certain items, or performing a task within the time limit. If you fail to complete these tasks, you can't just retake them, you'd have to drop out. Then you need to try again once you respawn. If, however, you manage to complete all of their tasks and then had the misfortune of dropping out later, you don't have to worry about doing them again, as the game will mark them as completed, despite the civilians asking you to repeat it. The levels themselves are also a real treat. Each of these stages are large enough to compensate for Penny's wide array of moves, and they are all very stylized to fit a certain theme. Malta Bini, for example, is your obligatory fire stage that takes on a kitchen aesthetic similar to Mount Valbano in Mario Odyssey, while Bubblin' takes on the appearance of a water park. Throughout these stages, you can find the usual platforming elements like your bounce pads that will launch Penny higher if she's landing on them from higher altitude, or these screws that can be rotated with the use of Penny's spin attack. There are also these trip wires that can sling you to where you need to go, and these banisters that will do the same thing, but the player will have the ability to aim where she lands. Try your best to remember that, because years of platforming has conditioned my brain to always time your jump on these things, when in reality, you just need to aim. These stages also have their own unique gimmicks to them, most of the time being optional and won't overstay their welcome, which I can greatly appreciate. The devs want to keep the player on the move and won't bog you down with too much stop and go. Some of these gimmicks can range from knocking these bulls into these holes like they're golf balls, or golf bulls in this case, to trigger a different route Penny can take, while others can involve riding these magnetic waves to the next platform. What also surprised me about these levels is the fact that they're filled with civilians and not just enemies. It makes the stage feel more alive than it already is, and when you walk up to them, these civilians will say a bit of dialogue that matches the environment they're currently in, and further adds to the level of charm this game has already. Hey, you thought it was a good idea to just leave your money on the ground. That's on you. Penny can also stumble across different power-ups that will grant her a temporary ability or an added property to her yo-yo as long as it's active, like granting her the Skyflyer from Ape Escape, a larger yo-yo to destroy breakable walls and mow those penguins down, or a motor that lets Penny ride her yo-yo at max speed until it runs out. These power-ups will normally show up as they are needed, so if you see one of these floating around, it's always a good idea to put them to use when you can. Once you've reached the end of the stage, you can potentially increase your score by landing on the highest point of the goalpost, or in this case, the center stage. You'll then enter a mini game which can have up to 3 rounds depending on which part of the goalpost you landed on. During this mini game, you have to mimic the inputs you see on screen, similar to how things are done in Jet Set Radio, except you have the face buttons to input and not just your analog stick. Just keep in mind that if you bomb even one of these, the mini game will end regardless of whether or not you landed on the center stage. So if you want the best score you can possibly get, try not to wipe out during your performance, otherwise the jig is up. The levels per area can vary between 2 to 4 acts, and as much as I can appreciate the amount of levels I can play in each place you visit, I will admit that having up to 4 stages can be a bit much. I mean, Vanilla Town comes busting out of the gate with 4 stages before you can reach the boss level, and by the time I cleared the 4th stage, I already wanted to move on to the next area. The levels are thankfully not long at all, so you won't be spending too much time on each one, unless you're going out of your way to find every collectible. Still, if Evening Star decides to make a sequel, toning down to 3 stages maximum is a much better balance. Then we have the boss fights, and this is where the game continues to shine. Like most platformers, boss fights are mainly here to test out how well the player's skills have developed over the course of the time they spent playing the game. What all of these bosses have in common is that they require the player to achieve a win condition 3 times before that boss goes down. The reason why I had to list it as a win condition in this case is because unlike most bosses in these platforming games where all you're doing is hitting the boss once they're vulnerable, the win condition in this game will vary from one fight to another. 1 minute you're playing a game of billiards, the next minute you're trying to even the scales in your favor so you don't get tossed in jail. There's even a moment where you only have one single win condition, which is the race to the finish. And it's here I realized that while the aspect of fighting these bosses are there, you're also playing a mini game presented by the bosses themselves in order to keep you on your toes, which is a nice change of pace. The small health pool these bosses have, or none at all depending on who you're fighting against, ensures that these battles won't last any longer than they need to be, and there's plenty of fun to be had. With the exception of the big win, this thing is either going to royally curb stomp you out of existence, or it will go down as soon as a fight begins. This boss fight does have one hell of a banger theme, compliments to Hunter Bridges for making this fight more tolerable. But of course, we can't have a game with this much style and flair without having a good composer to back it up, and considering that this was put together by the same team who made Sonic Mania, it's no surprise they would bring T. Lopes to handle the soundtrack. And if you are aware of who T. Lopes is, you already know this game's soundtrack is going to be amazing from start to finish. There is a reason why this composer keeps getting more work and have been brought on to compose for other games like the Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, Metal Slug Tactics, and Streets of Rage 4. And with the work he put in for Penny's Breakaway, I can promise there is not a song that will disappoint you. My personal favorite is a tune that plays on Multibini. I'm already a massive sucker for jazzy tunes, and I might have said this in a previous video or two. Plus I love how he added this bubbling sound in the background to fit the boiling lava aesthetic the stage has going for it. This proves that T. Lopes has not lost his touch at all, and he doesn't plan to anytime soon. While he did a majority of the soundtrack, I should point out that he's not alone. Sean Balow, who others may know him as Cosmic Gem, is another composer I'm fairly new to. I say fairly because I did hear some of his pieces in Double Dragon Gaiden, and he also did the ending theme for Spark the Electric Jester 3. Try saying that 3 times fast. He handles most of the boss themes as well as a few others, and it would be a crime not to mention him for all the work he put into this game's music. I especially love the battle theme from Mr. Q, as it has a very Battle Network feel to it from start to finish. From the beginning to end, I've been having a lot of fun with this title, and while I did bring up some minor issues here and there, my biggest issue with the game is the fact that the camera is locked forever, and I found that to be a bit odd to have in a modern platformer like this one. While there are definitely some areas where the game benefits from having a locked camera, there were also other areas in the game where I wish I could just angle it a little better, especially when I'm trying to clear more precise platforming. There were a number of times where the angle was messing up with my depth perception, and I dropped out quite a bit as a result. Again, if they decided to make a sequel, an unlocked camera when applicable would work wonders for this game. All in all, Penny's Big Breakaway feels like a Sega Saturn platform brought into the modern age with its stylized appearance, unique character designs, and seamless platforming that will reward the player if they're willing to master it or just want to have a relaxing time running through the world of Macaroon. So if you've been hungry for a game with this kind of aesthetic, then look no further because Penny's definitely got your number in that department. And to Evening Star, I really hope your studio grows from this title and you continue to deliver more games like these. This one was truly an amazing gem to play. Anyway, that's all I have for today. If you like what you see, hit me with that siggity sub, make sure you like the video, and I hope I get to see you all in the next one. Later!